This eyesore is done. I'm handling it myself.
That's what the HOA president said the night she sent her maintenance man to open a hidden diversion valve on the golf course drainage line. A valve that redirected 14,000 gallons of fertilizer-contaminated stormwater directly into my workshop. I came home to 8 inches of brown water covering the concrete floor, my tools submerged, my late wife's leather saddlebag soaked through, a 1972 Harley shovelhead sitting in chemical runoff up to the engine case. She called it natural runoff, but I'm the hydraulic engineer who designed the drainage system for this entire development 18 years ago. I know where every pipe runs, and water doesn't flow uphill, not unless someone installs a $23,000 valve to make it. She thought she was flooding out a quiet widower. She didn't know she was flooding out the man who holds the original blueprints, the drainage easement, and enough evidence to end her career. Tell me, what would you have done? 4 years ago, I buried my wife Elena in a cemetery overlooking the Charleston Harbor. Pancreatic cancer, 8 months from diagnosis to the end. She was 47. We'd talked about retiring to the low country for years. Not some beach rental, a real place. Somewhere with live oaks and salt marshes and room to breathe. Elena loved the idea of Palmetto Ridge because I'd helped build it. 18 years before she got sick, I was the lead hydraulic engineer on the original development team. I designed every retention basin, every culvert, every stormwater pipe that keeps 214 homes and an 18-hole golf course from flooding when the Carolina rains come. After she died, I bought a house on Heron Lane, lot 42, backing up to the 14th fairway with a view of the marsh beyond the 16th green. Palmetto Ridge was the kind of place that looked perfect on the brochure. Manicured fairways, Spanish moss draping the entrance oaks, a guard gate staffed 24 hours, 214 homes arranged around a championship golf course like petals on a flower. The kind of community where everyone smiles and waves, and half of them are keeping score. The previous owner had built a detached workshop behind the house, permitted, inspected, approved by the original HOA board. I didn't buy it for the golf. I bought it for that workshop. See, Elena and I had a plan. We were going to restore a 1972 Harley-Davidson shovelhead together. She'd found the frame at a swap meet in Macon, rusted and forgotten under a tarp. "That's the one," she said, running her fingers across the tank like she could already see the paint underneath. Midnight blue with silver pinstripes, her colors. I couldn't finish it with her, but I could finish it for her. So, every evening after work, I'd walk out to the workshop, flip on the overhead fluorescence, and disappear into engine gaskets and chrome polish. The place smelled like motor oil, cedar shavings from the workbench I'd built, and just a trace of salt air drifting in from the marsh. It was the only place where the grief got quiet. That lasted about 6 months before Brenda Whitfield decided I was a problem. She pulled up to my driveway one Tuesday morning in a white Cadillac Escalade, climbed out in a linen blazer over yoga pants, and walked straight to the workshop like she owned it. Blonde hair pinned tight, Gucci sunglasses pushed up on her forehead, clipboard in one hand, the other hand already pointing. "Mr. Townsend, this structure is an unapproved accessory building, and it's in violation of our community aesthetic standards." I wiped my hands on a shop rag and looked at her. It was approved by the previous board in 2016, permits on file with the county. She didn't blink. "I've been running this community for 9 years. If I say it needs review, it needs review." That was my introduction to Brenda Whitfield, HOA president since 2017, 58 years old, the kind of woman who confused a volunteer board position with a government appointment and a linen blazer with a badge. She ran Palmetto Ridge like a personal kingdom, controlled the newsletter, picked the landscapers, approved the paint colors, and made sure everyone understood that crossing her meant trouble. Her husband Dale sat on the county planning commission, which meant she had connections that most HOA presidents could only dream about. Together, they were the unofficial gatekeepers of everything that happened between the front gate and the marsh. I did what any engineer would do. I pulled the CC and Rs, read them cover to cover, and confirmed what I already knew. My workshop was fully compliant. Article 7, Section 2. Existing structures approved by prior boards could not be retroactively declared non-conforming without a supermajority vote and documented cause. I mailed her a copy of the relevant section with my response highlighted in yellow. She never acknowledged receiving it, But 2 weeks later, I noticed the maintenance crew spending an unusual amount of time near the utility panel behind my house. I didn't think much of it then. I should have. The first real move came on a Wednesday in late March. I walked into the workshop after dinner, hit the light switch, and nothing happened. No fluorescent hum, no overhead fan spinning up. Just dead silence and the faint smell of warm dust. I checked the breaker panel on the side of the house. Everything looked normal. Then I walked around to the utility junction behind the garage where the workshop's dedicated 20 amp line tied into the main panel. Someone had pulled the disconnect. Not tripped, pulled. The handle was in the off position, and there were fresh scuff marks on the metal housing. I flipped it back on. Lights came up, but everything ran fine. The next morning, it was off again. I called the HOA office and asked about any maintenance work near my property. The receptionist transferred me to Ray Puckett, the maintenance supervisor. Ray was a quiet guy in his 50s who always looked like he'd rather be fishing. He said there had been a routine inspection of shared electrical infrastructure and that some panels had been temporarily adjusted for safety. Which panels? I asked. I'd have to check the work order. Who authorized it? Long pause. Mrs. Whitfield. That was the only honest answer I got out of Ray Puckett for a long time. Over the next 6 days, my power went out 4 more times. Always the same disconnect. Always overnight or when I was at work. I'd come home, find the workshop dark, and walk around to flip it back on. On the 3rd day, the battery charger on the shovel head died from the constant cycling. On the 5th day, the temperature in the paint booth fluctuated so badly that the primer coat I'd spent 2 days laying down bubbled and cracked like sunburned skin. 6 days of work ruined. 2 custom-ordered parts permanently damaged from the humidity that built up without ventilation. The chrome fork tubes I'd polished to a mirror finish had started to pit from the moisture. And a half-finished motorcycle sitting in a workshop that smelled like mildew and frustration. The shovel head deserved better than this. Elena deserved better than this. I documented everything. Photographs of the disconnect handle in the off position with timestamps. A log of every outage with the exact time I discovered it and the time I restored power. I even installed a cheap trail camera pointed at the utility junction, but the footage only showed a maintenance cart pulling up after dark. No clear face. Here's something most homeowners don't know. In South Carolina, intentionally disrupting electrical service to an occupied or functional structure can constitute criminal tampering under state code. Section 1611, 520. It doesn't matter if you're the HOA president or the Pope. If you cut someone's power on purpose, that's a crime. I filed a formal written complaint with the HOA board, sent it certified mail, return receipt requested, addressed it to Phil Stanton, the treasurer, because I already knew Brenda would circular file anything addressed to her. Phil called me 2 days later. He had the voice of a man who'd spent 9 years learning not to disagree with Brenda Whitfield. Garrett, I looked into it, and it seems like the outages were related to a system-wide load balancing issue. No one's targeting your property specifically. Phil, the disconnect handle was physically pulled. That's not a load issue. I'll make a note of it. He made a note, and nothing changed, except that the outages stopped, because Brenda had already made her point. She wanted me to know that she could reach into my space anytime she wanted. She wanted me to feel watched, harassed, and small. What she didn't understand is that I've spent 30 years reading infrastructure contracts and maintenance logs. I know what a routine inspection looks like, and I know what sabotage looks like. The difference is usually one honest work order. The Saturday after the power came back for good, I was out in the workshop sanding down the ruined primer coat when I heard a knock on the open bay door. It was Sheila Brennan from 2 streets over. She was holding a plate of cookies and looking over her shoulder like she was being followed. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" she said. She told me she'd lived in Palmetto Ridge for 11 years. She told me Brenda had driven out at least 2 families before me, one with noise complaints about their children's swing set, another with a fabricated drainage lien that took 18 months to clear. She told me every person who ever pushed back against Brenda ended up miserable, outspent, or gone. "I just want you to be careful," she said. She doesn't stop. I thanked her for the cookies. I didn't tell her that I had no intention of being the 3rd family Brenda Whitfield ran out of Palmetto Ridge. 3 weeks after the power game stopped, a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox, cream-colored paper. Return address from a law firm in Mount Pleasant, Calder, Hayes, and Webb. the kind of envelope that smells like expensive cologne and bad intentions. Inside was a 6-page cease and desist letter demanding that I demolish my workshop within 60 days or face legal action by the Palmetto Ridge Homeowners Association. The letter cited 3 violations: non-conforming accessory structure, storage of hazardous materials in a residential zone, and degradation of community aesthetic standards. Each violation was described in dense legal language designed to intimidate someone who doesn't read contracts for a living. I do read contracts for a living. I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the CC and Rs, and a yellow highlighter. It took me about 40 minutes to find every clause that contradicted their letter. Article 7, Section 2, protected existing structures approved by prior boards from retroactive reclassification. Article 12, Section 5 required a formal environmental assessment before any hazardous materials claim could be filed, and no assessment had been conducted. Article 9, Section 1 defined aesthetic standards as applying only to structures visible from the street. My workshop was behind my house, screened by a 6-foot privacy fence and a row of crepe myrtles. Their own governing documents dismantled their own letter. I wrote a 4-page response. No threats, no emotions, just highlighted excerpts, section numbers, and a simple conclusion. The workshop is compliant, the allegations are unsupported, and any legal action taken without proper procedural basis would expose the HOA to liability for harassment and abuse of process. I sent it certified mail, return receipt, and I copied the HOA's insurance carrier because here's something most people don't realize. When an HOA pursues frivolous legal action, the insurance company that covers the association's liability has a financial interest in shutting it down. One phone call from the carrier's risk department can end a power trip faster than any judge. 2 weeks of silence. Then I got a call from an unknown Mount Pleasant number. It was the attorney himself. Young guy. Sounded tired. Mr. Townsend, I've reviewed your response and the governing documents. I've advised Mrs. Whitfield that the association's position is not supported by the C, C, and Rs, and that pursuing this further carries significant risk. What did she say? He paused. She said she doesn't care what the documents say. I almost laughed. Well, I appreciate the honesty. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I wouldn't keep your guard down. That was the last I heard from the law firm, but it wasn't the last I heard from Brenda. Within a week, the whisper campaign started. Brenda told Janet Groves at the pool that I was storing gasoline drums in the workshop. She told Phil Stanton I was running a commercial operation without a business license. She told the Hendersons next door that the chemicals in my shop were probably leaching into the groundwater. None of it was true. I had motor oil, brake cleaner, a small acetylene torch setup, and paint, all stored according to county fire code in proper containers on a ventilated steel shelf I'd built myself. The county fire marshal had walked through the workshop 6 months earlier as part of a routine inspection and found 0 violations. But truth doesn't travel as fast as gossip in a gated community. And in a place like Palmetto Ridge, gossip is currency. People I'd waved to for 3 years started crossing the street. The Hendersons stopped letting their kids play in the backyard closest to my property. Someone left an anonymous note in my mailbox that said, "We don't need your kind of project in this neighborhood." Your kind of project. I read that note twice, folded it up, and put it in the file I was building. The file that started as a nuisance log and was slowly becoming something else. Something with weight. That Saturday night, Hank Collier knocked on my front door. Hank was 65, retired master plumber, lived on Marsh Wren Court. Big man, hands like catcher's mitts. He'd never said more than 10 words to me before. You're the engineer who built the water system here, right? Stormwater, yeah. He nodded. Brenda's been talking about you at the clubhouse, calling you a safety hazard. I just want you to know, some of us think she's the hazard. He handed me a 6-pack of Yuengling and walked back to his truck. That was the beginning of my first alliance, and Brenda had no idea it was forming. The rain started on a Thursday night in late June, 3.5 inches overnight, which is heavy even for the low country. I woke up at 5:30, made coffee, and looked out the kitchen window at the backyard. The grass was underwater, not puddles, not standing water from poor grading. A flat, unbroken sheet of brown water stretching from the cart path behind the 14th fairway all the way to my workshop door. And the workshop door was open 6 inches. I'd left it cracked for ventilation the night before. I pulled on boots and walked out. The water was warm, the color of sweet tea, and it smelled wrong. Not like rain, like fertilizer and cut grass and something chemical underneath. The kind of smell that comes off a golf course after a heavy application of nitrogen. Inside the workshop, 8 inches of standing water covered the concrete floor. My rolling tool chest sat in it like a steel island. The bottom 3 drawers were submerged. Wrenches, sockets, specialty pullers, all sitting in brown water. The compressor motor was half under. The welding cart had tipped over. And the shovel head, the frame I'd spent 14 months fitting, grinding, and priming, sat with its engine case and lower frame rails below the water line. I waded to the far wall where I kept the saddlebag Elena had picked out. Caramel leather. She'd found it at a vintage shop in Savannah and haggled the price down from $120 to $85 because she spotted a repaired stitch on the back panel. Character, she'd called it. That bag's been somewhere. It was soaked through. The leather had already started to swell and darken. The stitching she'd been so proud of spotting was pulling apart at the seams. Water dripped from the buckle onto my boots, and each drop sounded louder than it had any right to. I stood there in 8 inches of water, holding my dead wife's saddlebag, and I felt something shift inside my chest. Not rage exactly, something colder and more patient than rage, the kind of feeling that doesn't burn out, the kind that builds foundations. That's when I heard the Escalade. Brenda pulled up to the edge of my driveway, climbed out in rain boots and a navy windbreaker, and walked to the backyard fence with her phone in one hand. She looked at the water. She looked at the workshop. She looked at me standing in it. Oh, Garrett, what a mess. She tilted her head. You know, with all this flooding, maybe it's a sign that the workshop just isn't suited for this lot. Natural runoff can be so unpredictable. Natural runoff. She said it the way someone says thoughts and prayers when they don't actually care. I didn't respond right away. I was looking past her at the water, specifically at the direction it was flowing. Here's what you need to understand. I designed this drainage system. Every residential lot in Palmetto Ridge is graded to shed water away from structures and toward collection swales that feed into the main stormwater trunk line. That trunk line runs east, under the cart path, through a series of retention basins on the golf course and out to the tidal marsh. Water flows away from the houses, always. That's the entire point of the engineering. But the water in my yard wasn't coming from my yard. It was coming from the golf course, flowing west, across the cart path, up a grade change that I specifically designed to prevent exactly this. Water was running uphill through my fence and into my workshop. That doesn't happen without help. I looked at Brenda. She was still smiling, phone raised like she was documenting the damage for the HOA file, or maybe for her own satisfaction. You're right, I said. Natural runoff can be unpredictable. She nodded, already turning back toward her Escalade. But engineered drainage isn't, I added, and I would know. She stopped for half a second, just half a second, then she kept walking. The Escalade door closed. The engine turned over. She drove away. I went back inside and pulled up the drainage plans I'd kept in a fireproof cabinet since the day I moved in. I spread them out on the kitchen table, the same table where I'd dissected her lawyer's letter, and traced the main trunk line from the marsh outfall back through the retention basins, under the cart path, and along the edge of the 14th fairway. Everything in those plans said the water should have flowed east, away from me, out to the marsh. Something between the fairway and my property was redirecting the flow, and whatever it wasn't in my plans. The next Monday, I drove to the Colleton County Records Office. It's a flat brick building off Highway 17, with fluorescent lighting and the faint smell of old paper and copier toner. I'd been there dozens of times over the years for work. The clerks knew me by name. I requested the original stormwater management plan for Palmetto Ridge, DHEC permit number SC-00478832. My name was on the title block. My professional engineer stamp was on every sheet. 18 years ago, I'd signed off on a system designed to handle a 100-year storm event with zero residential flooding. I spread the plans across the counter and traced the main trunk line. The 16-inch reinforced concrete pipe ran from the retention basin behind the 14th green, east under the cart path, through 2 additional retention cells, and out to the tidal marsh discharge point. Every junction was marked, every valve was noted, every flow direction was calculated and documented. Then I drove back to Palmetto Ridge and walked the actual route. It took me 20 minutes to find it. Behind the 14th green, partially hidden by ornamental grasses and a maintenance access cover, was a gate valve on the 16-inch main line that was not in my plans. A butterfly valve with a manual actuator, bolted in line with stainless steel flanges that looked maybe 12 to 15 months old. In the open position, this valve would divert stormwater from the golf course retention system directly into the secondary drainage channel that ran along the back property line of Heron Lane. My property line, my workshop. Someone had installed a valve that could flood my house on command, and they'd done it roughly 14 months ago, right around the time Brenda started sending me violation notices. I photographed everything: the valve, the flanges, the actuator position, the pipe markings. I compared them side by side with my original plans. The contrast was undeniable. This hardware didn't exist in my design. It had been added after construction, without engineering review, without a DHEC permit, and without any record in the county's infrastructure database. Back home, I pulled the HOA's financial records, available to any homeowner who requests them under the C, and Rs. Buried in the maintenance budget from 14 months ago, there was a line item: drainage improvement, Fairway 14 area, $23,400. Approved by Brenda Whitfield. No board vote recorded, no contractor name listed, no engineering specification attached. $23,000 of homeowner money spent on a valve designed to flood one homeowner's property. But that wasn't the biggest discovery. The following week, I filed a FOIA request with the county for all communications between the Planning Commission and any entity related to Palmetto Ridge development rights. In South Carolina, government emails are public record, and the county has 15 business days to respond. They responded in 11, and what came back changed everything. The response was 162 pages of emails, meeting notes, and internal memos. Most of it was routine zoning business, but starting about 14 months ago, the tone shifted. Dale Whitfield, Brenda's husband, county planning commissioner, had exchanged 14 emails over 7 months with a company called Coastal Ventures LLC. The emails discussed acquiring the Palmetto Ridge golf course and converting it into a boutique resort and condominium development. The projected deal value was $11.2 million. And there, in the fourth email, was the problem. Coastal Ventures engineer noted that the primary stormwater discharge easement ran through lot 42, Heron Lane, my lot. Without that easement, the development couldn't proceed. The email ended with a question from the Coastal Ventures rep. Is the current owner open to selling? Dale's response: Brenda is handling it. 3 words, and suddenly every violation letter, every power shutoff, every flood, and every whisper campaign made perfect sense. I spent the next 3 weeks building my case like I was engineering a retaining wall, 1 layer at a time, each piece load-bearing, nothing decorative. First, the surveillance. I installed 6 water-level sensors around my property, 2 behind the workshop, 2 along the fence line facing the cart path, 1 at the drainage swale, and 1 at the property's lowest point near the marsh. Each sensor logged water depth every 5 minutes and transmitted to a weatherproof data logger bolted under my back deck. I mounted 2 trail cameras on the fence posts overlooking the diversion valve behind the 14th green. Motion activated. Infrared for night recording. I positioned them so they captured the valve, the access cover, and about 15 feet of the maintenance cart path on either side. If anyone touched that valve again, I'd have the footage, the timestamp, and the resulting water data to match. Second, the paper trail. I drove back to the county records office and requested everything: the original stormwater permit application, the DHEC approval letter, the as-built drawings, the maintenance and inspection log that the HOA was required to keep as a condition of the permit. I also filed a second FOIA request, this time targeting all financial disclosures filed by Dale Whitfield as a planning commissioner for the past 3 years. Every document was a brick in the wall I was building. Here's something worth knowing if you ever deal with a county official who has a conflict of interest. In South Carolina, Planning Commission members are required to file annual statements of economic interest with the State Ethics Commission. If they have a financial relationship with any entity that comes before the commission, they're required to recuse themselves. Failure to disclose is a misdemeanor. Failure to recuse can void any approval they voted on. Dale Whitfield had voted to approve 3 zoning variances for properties adjacent to Palmetto Ridge in the past 2 years. Coastal Ventures LLC was the applicant on 2 of them. Dale never recused himself. He never disclosed any relationship with the company, and his wife was negotiating a 6-figure kickback from the same company. Third, the allies. I sat down with Hank Collier on his back porch one evening. We drank Yuengling and I showed him the valve photos. Hank had been a master plumber for 35 years. He looked at the flanges and shook his head. "That's not maintenance work," he said. "That's a retrofit. Somebody paid real money to put that in, and they did it without pulling a plumbing or mechanical permit. I guarantee it." Hank offered to help me trace the secondary drainage line from the valve to my property. We did it the following Saturday at 6 in the morning, before the golf course maintenance crew arrived. He brought a pipe locator he'd kept from his working days. We mapped the entire diverted flow path in 3 hours. Sheila Brennan was my second ally. She'd kept records of every interaction she'd had with Brenda over 11 years. Violation letters, threatening emails, board meeting minutes where Brenda had shouted down homeowners who questioned her spending. Sheila had a file cabinet full of documentation that made mine look thin. My third move was the press. I contacted Nolan Cross, an investigative reporter at the Charleston Post and Courier who'd covered HOA abuse stories before. I didn't give him everything, not yet. I told him I had a story involving unauthorized infrastructure modification, potential embezzlement of HOA funds, and a conflict of interest involving a county official. I told him I'd have proof within a month. "How solid?" he asked. "Engineering drawings with my PE stamp, surveillance footage, DHEC violations, and FOIA documents." He was quiet for about 5 seconds. "Keep my number." The final piece was the most important. I did not fix the diversion valve. I left it exactly where it was, in exactly the position I found it. If Brenda was going to use it again, I wanted her to. I wanted the cameras rolling. I wanted the sensors recording. I wanted every drop of illegally diverted water measured, time-stamped, and documented. I did move everything valuable out of the workshop. The shovelhead went to a climate-controlled storage unit in Walterboro. The specialty tools went into sealed containers in my garage attic. I left the big items, the tool chest, the compressor, the welding cart, right where they were. From the outside, the workshop looked exactly the same as it always had. A baited trap looks the same as the real thing. That's the whole point. And I'd spent 30 years designing systems that worked exactly as intended. Brenda wasn't done. She was just escalating to a weapon she thought I couldn't fight, the HOA itself. In mid-August, she called an emergency meeting of the Palmetto Ridge Homeowners Association. The posted agenda had one item: vote to declare Lot 42 Workshop a community nuisance and authorize removal within 30 days. She needed a 2/3 supermajority to force demolition. That meant 143 votes out of 214 eligible homeowners. The notice went out on a Thursday. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. 12 days notice. I read it twice and smiled. Because the CC and RS required 21 days notice for any vote involving structural compliance enforcement. She was 9 days short, and I knew she was counting on nobody noticing. I also noticed the stack of pre-printed proxy ballot forms that Sheila Brennan photographed at the clubhouse reception desk. Brenda had left them out with a note that said, "For homeowners who can't attend, please sign and return to the HOA office before Tuesday." The forms were pre-filled. The vote checkbox was already marked yes. All the homeowner had to do was sign. That's not a proxy ballot. That's a loyalty pledge. I went to the meeting. The community center on Osprey Drive smelled like stale coffee and carpet cleaner. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead. Brenda stood at the front behind a folding table with a microphone, her reading glasses perched on her nose, wearing a coral blazer like she was chairing a congressional hearing. Phil Stanton sat to her left, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Ray Puckett stood against the back wall with his arms crossed. About 130 people showed up in person. The rest were represented by proxy. Brenda opened with a 10-minute speech about community standards and protecting property values and the kind of neighborhood we all chose to live in. She never mentioned me by name. She just kept saying the structure on Heron Lane and certain residents who refused to cooperate with the board. When she opened the floor for comments, 3 of her allies stood up and repeated her talking points like they'd rehearsed them. One woman said the workshop attracted rodents. Another said it was an eyesore that made her uncomfortable walking her dog. A man I'd never spoken to said he'd heard there were hazardous chemicals stored in an unapproved building. All hearsay, all sourced from Brenda's whisper campaign. I stood up. The room got quiet. "I'd just like to ask one question," I said. "How many proxy ballots were submitted, and how many of those homeowners received the required 21-day notice as outlined in Article 10, Section 4 of the CC and RS?" Brenda stared at me over her reading glasses. "The notice period was adequate, Mr. Townsend. 12 days. The CC and RS require 21 for structural compliance votes. That's a procedural deficiency that would invalidate the entire result. We'll note your objection." She turned to Phil. "Call the vote." They voted, 89 to 41 in favor of declaring the workshop a nuisance. With 47 proxy ballots that I knew hadn't met the notice requirement, and at least a dozen that Sheila had confirmed came from homeowners who were out of town and hadn't been contacted. I didn't protest. I didn't raise my voice. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair and walked out through the side door. The humid night air hit me like a warm towel. Behind me, I heard Brenda laughing. I heard her tell Phil, he'll be gone by September. The next morning, I filed a formal governance challenge with the South Carolina Secretary of State's office, Division of HOA Oversight. I included the meeting notice with the 12-day timeline, the pre-filled proxy forms, Sheila's photographs, and a copy of the CC&R provisions that had been violated. In South Carolina, an HOA vote conducted without proper notice isn't just voidable. It's void. It never happened. And the officers who conducted it can be held personally liable for any actions taken on its authority. Brenda thought she'd won a vote. What she'd actually done was hand me another piece of evidence, another layer in the wall I was building around her. And the best part, she still thought I was losing. Tropical storm. Delia formed off the Georgia coast in the first week of September. The forecast called for 4 to 6 inches of rain over 2 days. Every weather app on my phone was red. I knew what was coming. Not the storm. I'd survived plenty of those. I knew what Brenda would do with it. The night before the storm made landfall, I sat in my living room with the sensor dashboard open on my laptop. 6 green dots, all reading 0. No water, no movement. Just the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of wind picking up in the live oaks. At 11:47 p.m., the trail camera on the south fence post triggered. I watched the footage in real time on my phone. A golf course maintenance cart rolled up the path behind the 14th green. The headlights cut through the dark. One figure stepped out. Ray Puckett. He walked to the access cover, pulled it open, knelt beside the diversion valve, and turned the actuator to full open. The whole thing took less than 90 seconds. He didn't look around. He didn't hesitate. This was not the first time he'd done this. He got back in the cart and drove toward the maintenance barn. The camera caught his face clearly. Side profile and a 3/4 angle when he turned to check the valve position one last time before leaving. I saved the footage to 3 locations: local drive, cloud backup, and a USB stick that I locked in my truck's glove compartment. Then I went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. There's a certain peace that comes from knowing exactly what's about to happen and being ready for it. The storm hit before dawn, 5.2 inches in 11 hours. The heaviest band passed over Palmetto Ridge between 4 and 7 in the morning. Rain hammered the roof so hard it sounded like someone was pouring gravel from a dump truck. By 8 a.m., my sensors told the whole story. Water depth behind the workshop, 14 inches. Flow direction, west from the golf course toward my property. Flow rate, approximately 800 gallons per minute through the diverted channel. The retention basin behind the 14th green, which should have been absorbing the runoff, was bypassing straight into my yard. I put on boots and walked out. The workshop was drowning. 14 inches of brown water, thick with golf course fertilizer. The smell was overwhelming. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and something sharp and chemical that burned the back of my throat. I took water samples in 3 labeled glass jars. Date, time, location, written in permanent marker on the lids. Here's something most people don't know about stormwater regulations. Under the Clean Water Act and South Carolina's Pollution Control Act, diverting untreated stormwater containing fertilizer chemicals from a golf course into a residential area is an environmental violation. DHEC can impose civil penalties of up to $25,000 per day for each day the violation continues. That's not a fine, That's a financial death sentence. The water was still rising when Brenda drove by at 9:15. I was standing in my front yard, boots muddy, coffee in hand. She slowed the Escalade, looked at the water pouring around the side of my house, and I saw her smile, a small, satisfied smile. The kind of smile that says everything is going exactly according to plan. She waved, I waved back. What she didn't know was that the workshop was empty. Every piece of the shovel head was safe in Walterboro. Every irreplaceable tool was sealed in my garage attic. The things sitting in 14 inches of fertilizer water were a rusted-out compressor I'd been meaning to scrap, an empty tool chest, and a welding cart with a dead tank. She was flooding a movie set, and every second of it was on camera. The sensors recorded the water level peaking at 16.4 inches at 11:20 a.m. before slowly receding as the storm passed. Total duration of elevated water, 19 hours. Total volume of diverted storm water, approximately 14,000 gallons. All of it contaminated with golf course chemicals. All of it illegally discharged onto residential property. I spent the afternoon downloading sensor logs, saving camera footage, and organizing the water sample jars. By evening, I had a timeline so precise that an engineering expert witness could reconstruct the entire event in a courtroom. Brenda had just flooded my property for the second time, and this time, she'd done it on camera, on sensors, with chemical evidence, and without knowing the target was empty. The trap was set. Now I just needed a stage. I requested a special meeting of the Palmetto Ridge Homeowners Association. The subject line on my written request said, "Presentation regarding stormwater infrastructure and community governance." Brenda approved it within 24 hours. Of course she did. She thought I was coming to negotiate my surrender. The meeting was set for a Thursday evening at 7 o'clock in the Palmetto Ridge Community Center. I reserved the large meeting room, the one with the projector screen, the PA system, and seating for 200. I told Phil Stanton I expected a big turnout. I wasn't wrong. 183 residents packed the room by 6:45. Word had spread. People brought lawn chairs from home. Sheila Brennan and Hank Collier sat in the second row. Nolan Cross from the Post and Courier stood in the back with a cameraman, press badge visible. Deputy Kyle Everett from the Colleton County Sheriff's Office leaned against the back wall near the emergency exit, arms folded. Brenda sat at the front table with Phil and 2 other board members. She was wearing a white blazer, pearl earrings, and that same satisfied expression she'd had the morning after the second flood. She had a stack of papers in front of her, probably the nuisance declaration and a removal timeline. She thought this was her night. I stood up, walked to the front, and connected my laptop to the projector. My hands were steady. My voice was clear. I'd given 100 engineering presentations in my career. This one was going to be the most satisfying. "Thank you for being here," I said. "I'll keep this short. I have a presentation about the drainage infrastructure in Palmetto Ridge. I think everyone should see it." The first slide was my original engineering plan, my name on the title block, my PE stamp in the corner, 18 years old. I explained what the system was designed to do: collect golf course and residential stormwater, route it through retention basins, and discharge it to the tidal marsh. Simple, proven, permitted. The second slide was a photograph of the diversion valve behind the 14th green. I put it next to my original plan. "This valve does not exist in my design," I said. "It was installed without a DHEC permit, without engineering review, and without board approval." The room went quiet. The third slide was the HOA financial record showing the $23,000 payment for drainage improvement, authorized by Brenda Whitfield alone. The fourth slide was the trail camera footage, 60 seconds of Ray Puckett opening the valve at 11:47 p.m. the night before Tropical Storm Delia, his face clearly visible, the timestamp clearly readable. The fifth slide was the sensor data, a graph showing water levels at my property spiking within hours of the valve being opened, peaking at 16.4 inches, with flow direction confirmed from the golf course toward residential lots. The sixth slide was the DHEC violation notice, already filed, already assigned a case number, unauthorized discharge of contaminated stormwater onto residential property, potential penalties, $25,000 per day. The seventh slide was the one that changed the temperature in the room. 14 emails between Dale Whitfield and Coastal Ventures, LLC, discussing the acquisition of the Palmetto Ridge Golf Course for $11.2 million, a development that could not proceed without the drainage easement that runs through my property, an easement that Brenda was trying to force me to abandon by flooding me out and demolishing my workshop. The 8th slide was Dale's 3-word email, "Brenda is handling it." I let that sit on the screen for 10 seconds. Nobody breathed. The room erupted, 183 people talking at once. Someone yelled, "She's been stealing from us!" A woman in the 3rd row stood up and pointed at Brenda. "You spent our reserves on this?" Brenda stood up. Her face was the color of raw shrimp. She grabbed her purse and turned toward the side door. Deputy Everett was already there. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm going to need you to stay." I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. I just turned off the projector and sat down. The deputy read Brenda her rights in front of 183 of her neighbors. Felony property damage, fraud, misuse of HOA funds. The room was dead silent except for the sound of the handcuffs clicking shut. She was escorted out of the community center in the same coral shoes she'd probably picked out that morning, thinking she'd be celebrating. The double doors swung shut behind her, and nobody moved for a full 5 seconds. Nolan Cross got every second on camera. The story ran on the Post and Courier's front page 2 days later. The headline read, "HOA, President Arrested After Engineer Exposes Flooding Scheme." Phil Stanton resigned that night. Dale Whitfield was placed under investigation by the County Ethics Commission the following week. I drove home alone, parked in the driveway, sat in my truck for a long time. The neighborhood was quiet. The oak trees moved in the evening breeze. Somewhere on the golf course, a sprinkler head clicked in slow circles. It was over. Brenda Whitfield pleaded no contest to 2 felony counts and 1 misdemeanor. The judge sentenced her to 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and full restitution for the damage to my property and workshop. $112,000. She was permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in the state of South Carolina. Dale resigned from the Planning Commission 3 days after the Ethics Commission opened its investigation. The commission eventually found that he had failed to disclose his financial relationship with Coastal Ventures LLC on 2 separate occasions and had voted on related matters without recusing himself. He was fined $15,000 and referred to the state attorney general's office for further review. The Coastal Ventures deal collapsed the morning after Nolan's article hit the front page. Their representative, a man named Tom Greer, who'd been quietly attending community events for months, stopped returning calls. The golf course stayed exactly what it was, a community amenity owned by the HOA Trust, not a resort development for out-of-state investors. The first thing the new board did was hold an open election. Real election. Paper ballots. 21-day notice. Independent count. Sheila Brennan was elected president by a margin of 162 to 19. Her first act was to commission an independent audit of every dollar the previous board had spent. The audit found $147,000 in unaccounted expenses over Brenda's 9-year tenure, pool resurfacing contracts awarded to her brother-in-law's company, landscaping invoices for work that was never performed, and the $23,000 drainage improvement that was really a weapon aimed at a widower's workshop. I received a settlement of $340,000 from the HOA's insurance carrier, covering property damage, lost personal items, emotional distress, and legal costs. It was more money than I'd expected, and I knew exactly what to do with part of it. I used a portion to establish the Palmetto Ridge Stormwater Education Fund. It sounds boring. It's not. The fund sponsors quarterly workshops, real workshops, not HOA power plays, where homeowners learn about drainage easements, stormwater rights, DHEC permit requirements, and how to spot infrastructure tampering. We also set up a legal resource hotline for homeowners across the Low Country facing HOA overreach. Hank Collier teaches the plumbing module. He's terrible at public speaking and excellent at explaining pipe fittings. The residents love him. The workshop took about 6 weeks to restore. New sealed concrete floor with proper drainage channels. Ironic, I know. New ventilation system. Better lighting. I even added a small window on the east wall that looks out toward the marsh. The 1972 shovelhead came home from Walterboro on a flatbed in late October. I spent 3 more months finishing what Elena and I had started. Rebuilt the transmission. Rewired the ignition. Laid down the final paint. Midnight blue with silver pinstripes, her colors. The chrome caught the overhead lights like it was brand new, which in a way it was. On the first Saturday in February, I rolled that motorcycle out of the workshop for the first time. The engine turned over on the second kick, and the sound filled the whole backyard, a deep, even rumble that bounced off the house and carried across the still morning air. Hank was standing in his driveway 2 streets over. Sheila came out on her porch. A few neighbors I barely knew walked to the end of their yards to watch. Nobody clapped. Nobody had to. They just stood there, coffee in hand, nodding. I rode it down Heron Lane, past the 14th fairway, past the spot where the diversion valve used to be. Removed now, properly decommissioned, documented in the new maintenance logs, and out through the front gate. The marsh smelled like salt and pluff mud. The road was empty. The engine hummed steady beneath me. Elena would have loved this ride. If you've ever dealt with an HOA that thought it owned you, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. And if this is your first time here, subscribe. We've got another one coming next week, and trust me, you're going to want to see what happened when a retired firefighter found out his HOA president had been forging inspection reports for 6 years. I'll see you then.
Here's the thing about Brenda Whitfield. She had 9 years of unchallenged power and lost everything in a single evening. Not because Garrett was louder or angrier, because he was patient, because he documented, because he understood systems, not just drainage systems, but the legal and procedural system that protect homeowners when the people in charge stop protecting them. That's the real lesson. The strongest weapon against petty authority isn't address, it's recourse. Certified mail, timestamp, FOII request, trail cameras. The kind of evidence that doesn't need you to raise your voice because it speaks for itself. Brenda spent 2 years trying to break a man who built infrastructure for a living. She never considered that he might build a case the same way, one layer at a time. Load-bearing, nothing decorative. When that wall was finished, it was the one thing she couldn't tear down. If you ever have an HOA president who's treated your neighborhood like a personal kingdom, drop your story in the comments. I read everyone. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. Next week, we got a story of a retired firefighter who discovered his HOA president had been forging inspection reports for 6 years. You don't want to miss how this one ends. See you next time.